Content Bill 2023. Mr. Speaker, the issue of extractive minerals and control any natural resource anywhere across the world, Mr. Speaker, continues to evoke serious reservations, especially when the local communities are not involved, Mr. Speaker. Especially the issue of minerals, the issue of oil. When you visit the Delta State, which should be where the dollar billionaires from Nigeria are, Mr. Speaker, that region is always unstable. I think they call it oil cars. You go countries like Congo, Mr. Speaker, DRC Congo has all the minerals in the world and the rainforest, but the stability continues to be scarce like a snowball in hell, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you go to Nigeria, part of Delta region, as I have indicated, the issue of natural resources, and I was watching a documentary, and for of us who have been very keen about natural resources, Mr. Speaker, you will realize that that region remains unstable. Of natural resources has not benefited the local population. And in as much as it has made billionaires, exploitation and extraction of natural resources has not benefited the local population. And in as much as it has made billionaires, billionaires from that region, Mr. Speaker, and you know there is a famous saying in Nigeria that when you board British Airways, you don't turn to your right, you only turn to your left, Mr. Speaker, and they only use first and second class. They don't go to economy class when they are boarding the plane, Mr. Speaker, because of the beauty of natural gas, natural oil that it is in Nigeria, other countries across Africa. I think somebody quipped somewhere that the reason we don't have oil gas in Kenya is because we do not have oil. Until the other day, Turkana, under tool oil program, Mr. Speaker, was able to be exploited. And you realize, Mr. Speaker, and you are governor, then that at that time, there was a lot of uncertainty about the management of tool oil, because I remember at some point, and it was reported in media, that the local population didn't even block the lorries from transporting oil from Turkana to be exported, the crude oil. And people who have lived long enough, like senior counsel Senator Kongo Mgeni, is familiar with such, Mr. Speaker. So this issue of natural resources, gas, oil, and other hydrocarbon resources are very critical. Like Tanzania, Mr. Speaker, there was a issue where to get the gas into Kenya and then be repackaged, especially cooking gas, to make it affordable, Mr. Speaker. We are in the era of the issue of environmental conservation and protection, where we are now discouraging use of firewood, Mr. Speaker, because we don't want to destroy and exploit the forests in the country. And therefore, gas that is naturally, that is there, exploitation and extraction of the same to be used for cooking and other industrial purposes is very critical, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you look at our constitution, under environment and natural resources, especially Article 69, the state has been obligated to ensure the extractive of natural resources from minerals, oil and gas and other hydrocarbon extractives, Mr. Speaker. The state is obligated to participate in such, Mr. Speaker. So what we are doing under this bill, I don't know, Mr. Speaker, you know, we are legislating. I don't know whether we are over-legislating or we are legislating, but the constitution that we passed 2010, Mr. Speaker, we still have a lot to go through. Under Article 69, this issue of local content, and I remember in the previous session, I've seen this under the chairperson of energy, I think under the former Senator Agnes Zani, was very passionate about local content bill. And at that time, Mr. Speaker, even under the mining, we need to bring all those issues. Because, Mr. Speaker, when you look under Mining Act, Mr. Speaker, we have a process of 70-20-10, where 70% of the revenue in extractive process is taken to national, 20% to county, and 10% to local community. We must ensure we bring it under one bill, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't have one in Mining Act, And I'm happy the former CS, your colleague, your neighbor, Governor Mfuria, was well versed with the issue of mining, Mr. Speaker. And our concern, even in Nandi, Mr. Speaker, we are talking about gold. I have gold in Karebe, Mr. Speaker. But my people have never benefited in any way, Mr. Speaker. We only see choppers coming in and out, the gold being taken away. We don't know how many kilos, Mr. Speaker. There has never been proper use of that natural resource, Mr. Speaker. So the issue of gold, even when you go to Migori, where my brother Migori, I have seen Senator Kalwale was in the chamber. Mr. Speaker, in fact, Nandi is the biggest producer of gold in Kenya. I'm surprised that the gold oil refinery was being built in Kakamega. Yet when you go to Kakamega, Kakamega, Mr. Speaker, you know, can you protect me? Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader, you should lead by example. Sir, you know the CS nominee for Interior.
And you know the CS nominee is a friend of Aaron, so I don't know why he wants to give out already occupied. But I know in the second coming of the kingdom, Mr. Speaker, Senator Sifuna might be a beneficiary. Mr. Speaker, of course, after discussing with ODM Central Committee and Parliamentary Group on that issue, Mr. Speaker, what we are just saying is that, for example, Nandi is the biggest gold producer. Even Kilimapesa, Mr. Speaker. Even when you go to the part of coast, Kitui, Mr. Speaker, this country has huge. We have rubies. We have a lot of exploitation and minerals and extractives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and therefore I know there is a gold oil refinery being built in Kakamega, Mr. Speaker. We are proposing, in my own opinion, because Nandi is the leading gold producer in the country, and I've seen it myself, Mr. Speaker, and I have numbers. We are paying almost, the company pays 300 million through tax, Mr. Speaker. But when you go to Kakamega, Mr. Speaker, they have what we call mundane, the historical around Kakamega region, Mr. Speaker. So that belt of gold goes through Vihiga all the way to Kakamega, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and therefore, under Article 69, we must also ensure exploitation should meet environmental standards, Mr. Speaker. And this bill has really tried, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we ensure, Mr. Speaker, and we also move, and I'm happy that the coastal Kenya, we have now the mining and blue economy, where we need to take care of biodiversity, Mr. Speaker. We must be compliant such that when we are doing mining along the coastal city, along the coastal counties of coast part of this country, Mr. Speaker, the biodiversity and genetic resources must be protected. Because we are, Mr. Speaker, you remember in the issue of fishing in international waters, we have some countries that have been blacklisted for overfishing, Mr. Speaker, and using trawlers that are not agreed, and therefore they destroy even biodiversity and genetics, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this Article 1969 that has developed a premise upon this act, the local content bill, is everything is local, Mr. Speaker. Everything is local. You must listen to what the people are saying, but the only way to make it value for the ordinary mwananchi, down there where this exploitation is done of minerals, Mr. Speaker, be it extractives like oil and gas and hydrocarbon, Mr. Speaker, that you want to extract, you must ensure that the national government, and we must reduce this, and I have seen, Mr. Speaker, we should ensure that 50% goes to the national government of the revenue, be it gold, be it oil and gas. Then, Mr. Speaker, the 20% to go to county. Then the 30% should go to that local community, Mr. Speaker. Even in the issue of water, you remember the issue of Muranga, Mr. Speaker. Muranga, most of the water, we were developing a tunnel that will bring water from Muranga all the way to Nairobi to satisfy the needs, Mr. Speaker. Why is it that when you go to Muranga, the people of Muranga, for example, do not have sufficient water, yet people from Nairobi are benefiting from it, Mr. Speaker? Even in Nandi County, Mr. Speaker, in Mgwen sub-county, Chesume sub-county, our water is being used in Kakamega. But when you go to Tuya Bay and around Kapkangani, Mr. Speaker, Kiptui areas, they don't have water. So the essence, Mr. Speaker, is having at least the local content being valued at that, people, Mr. Speaker. With that, and I'm happy that Senator Muranga, my brother Senator Nyutu, should follow up, because at the end of the day, we are taking all water, Mr. Speaker, to Nairobi. But when you go to Muranga, water and sanitation company, Mr. Speaker, it becomes a problem. So we must listen to the ground, kusikiza ground, Mr. Speaker, so that you don't attract unnecessary, Mr. Speaker, from unnecessary from the people. Mr. Speaker, number 2, when you look at clause number 3, Kenya is still very clean because it talks about exploitation of gas and other petroleum resources. Mr. Speaker, we need to resolve the issue of too low oil. I know the capacity and the projection that we wanted, Mr. Speaker, especially in Turkana. We must ensure the people of Turkana are beneficiaries, Mr. Speaker. And I'm happy the Senator of Turkana, and I think the Energy Committee should be, Mr. Speaker, should ensure at least if too low oil is exploring and mining and extracting petroleum and oil, Mr. Speaker, at least it should give value, Mr. Speaker, to the people of Turkana, for example. At least, Mr. Speaker. And my proposal has always been very simple, under local content. Let us review from 70%. Let us give 50 national, give 30 local community, Mr. Speaker, and then give 20% to counties, because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, when you are exploiting these resources, you might end up destroying the roads, maybe water, Mr. Speaker, you might, and a lot of process that is needed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you look at clause number 11, Mr. Speaker, this assessment, and under Article 10, we must look at the public participation, because under clause number 11, Mr. Speaker, this assessment of local capabilities, Mr. Speaker. When you look at clause number 9 and 10, it talks about establishment local development committee. Mr. Speaker, under the Mining Act, it says about mining development committee. And that committee, Mr. Speaker, is very important, because if you are generating revenue, for example, and you are saying this revenue, Mr. Speaker, 50% to go to national, 30% should go to the local community, and maybe 20% should go to counties. In terms of division of that revenue, Mr. Speaker, the 30% you must have a gazetted development, local content development committee, Mr. Speaker. I don't see, and I hope the mover of the motion is noting, we already have a mining development committee under the Mining Act. Now you want to establish a local content development committee. It will be what we call overlapping duties, Mr. Speaker. Is it possible to amend the Mining Act 2015, Mr. Speaker, and the mining rules under 2015 to ensure that we don't need to establish local development committee and establish mining development committee? But in principle, I agree that this committee should be there, Mr. Speaker, so that the revenue that is developed, Mr. Speaker, it can be shared. For example, when we were pushing for Karebe reforms, Mr. Speaker, gold, we wanted a gazetted mining development committee that out of almost 200 million US dollars that was being generated by the company for some time, even if they get 10% of around 2 million or 200,000 US dollars, Mr. Speaker, around 20 million Kenyan shillings, they were able to sit down and agree in terms of dispensary around Chemase, in terms of roads around Kibisem or other areas within Chemelil, Chemase, and even other parts of Nandi County, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, the establishment is very important, but of course, I hope the drafter of the motion should ensure that the local development mining committee, the local content development committee, Mr. Speaker, are able in possibility to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that they function properly and value. Mr. Speaker, quickly, because I had only 4 points, let's go to clause number 26, Mr. Speaker. It talks about employment and development plan. Mr. Speaker, the challenge we have, excuse me, the challenge we have is that most of these expatriate companies, Mr. Speaker, or foreign companies, work into the country. They just work in and import expatriates. Yet we need to develop that technology, Mr. Speaker. What would you explain that you have to fly somebody from India or from, we must agree under local content. When an expatriate comes to Migori, Kilimapesa, When they are doing extractives of the minerals in Kilimapesa, where my brother, Senator, Mr. Speaker, and of late, maybe I've been away too much, my brother, Senator from Migori, has always appeared relaxed nowadays, and he always smiling. I don't know because of Azimio la Kenya Kwanza government or what is happening. Mr. Speaker, the point when you go around Kilimapesa region, Kilimapesa, is it Kilimapesa? With this in Migori, Mr. Speaker, when you go to that region, when we give an expatriate or a company, it is the duty under this law to develop the technology of those people. It doesn't make sense, Mr. Speaker, in 21st century that we have to fly an oil engineer all the way from China or even from America, Mr. Speaker, while we can develop our issues, Mr. Speaker. Clause number 27, education and training for locals, I agree. Especially, I remember, Mr. Speaker, mining of gold, you use mercury cyanide. I realize that the companies are not doing training, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the people we have in one place or another, Mr. Speaker, are being able to train adequately, Mr. Speaker. We must agree that we must train. For example, if today a gold mine is decommissioned, how does the local community the chemicals, the training, handling of those chemicals, handling of the oil, handling of the minerals and other extractives, Mr. Speaker, we must develop the capacity training, Mr. Speaker. And you know nowadays, if you don't do public participation, in the Kiambu case of 2013, the courts pronounced themselves that public participation is no longer an option and involves the civic education, the training for the locals, Mr. Speaker, and I think it is very important, Mr. Speaker. I agree, clause number 30, the transfer of technology, of course, is very critical under the guidance of the Cabinet Secretary of Mining and Blue Economy, Mr. Speaker, and I know that it will be very important because the transfer of technology, when the nominees of Cabinet Secretaries will be confirmed, it should set out a strategic plan on how they can ensure there is local content. Up and short, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, what I can say about this bill, because I would want to allow my colleagues, is just local content. What does the value of the ordinary mwananchi when you have oil in Turkana, when you have gold in Nandi, when you have rubies and other extractives, when you have oil and gas, Mr. Speaker, which benefit is it to it, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, it is very important, Mr. Speaker, that we look at it. We must ensure, Mr. Speaker, some of the conflicts that we see is because of natural resources. But now we are giving opportunity, Mr. Speaker, and I'll request the mover, Senator Wahome Wamatinga, to amend to ensure that when it comes to the local content development committee, let us give 50 to national government, give 20 to counties, and then 30 to local communities so that they can plan themselves, Mr. Speaker. I think that is very important going into the future. In fact, the issue of licensing, fund for training and development fund, Mr. Speaker, I agree, because this is a straightforward bill, Mr. Speaker, that will come in handy, especially, Mr. Speaker. But the upshot is that I'm happy it has adhered to the principles of Article 69 on the issue of sustainable exploitation. Mr. Speaker, just in conclusion, the caveat is that we must ensure sustainable exploitation. Mr. Speaker, you know we are struggling with two things. We want to be compliant in terms of environmental protection and conservation, and then we want to be compliant in terms of exploitation of natural resources to benefit. So we must ensure there is sustainable. The word is sustainable exploitation of resources within that particular, Mr. Speaker. So, Speaker, with those many remarks, I beg to support and I'll bring amendments, Mr. Speaker. I thank you.
Senator Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to